Hello and welcome to Rick's Garage. So today in this episode what we are doing is some metal polishing. So you've got a project that you want to polish to a high standard and you are looking for a process in which to follow. Well, take a look at these guys. These are the fuel rails to my Alfa Romeo GTV V6. As you can see, they look absolutely spectacular if I do say so myself. So once again, if you are looking to achieve this kind of standard and you want to know how I did this, then stay tuned because I've got you covered. Okay guys, so I'm just going to run over a few of the products I'm going to be using in this video to achieve a nice shine on my fuel rails. Now I'm also going to go over the process very quickly. So the first stage is I'm going to wire wheel the fuel rails. Now this is a very ghetto, if not a silly way of doing it. I've put a cheap drill in a vise with my wire wheel on the end. I've got the trigger taped up and I'm controlling it with the switch on the plug. Again, it is quite a ghetto way of doing it, but it does the job. I am not suggesting this is great. I'm not suggesting you do the same, but you know, this is just what I've done. Yes, I've got a bench grinder, but unfortunately I've not got a wire wheel for that yet. But yeah, once again, this is what I'm doing. Okay, so that is the first stage. The next stage, what I've also got is a Dremel with a flexi attachment on the end, as you can see here, and on the end of that I've got a little attachment that looks like this, and on the end of that attachment I've got a couple of different grades of sanding discs. Now that is going to be the second stage. I'm going to go over these stages as I come to do them, guys. So after the second stage I'm then going to go on to the third stage, which would be some 320 grit wet and dry onto some 1200, and then here I've got some foam sanding discs. Again, I'm going to talk more about all this stuff, guys, as I come to use it. But yeah, I've got some 1000, 2000 and 3000 grit. With the sanding processes, especially on the paper sandpaper, I'm going to be using some WD-40 which works absolutely fantastically well. And then once I've gone through all the sanding stages, what I'm then going to do is use this attachment on the end of my flexi, and I'm going to use that with some good old metal polish. So yeah, that is the process. These are the products. Once again, guys, I'm going to discuss more about these as I come to use them. So without further ado, let's get stuck straight into the video. Okay guys, so ignore the fuel rail at the back because that one is only halfway through the process. The fuel rail we are focusing on in this video is this one right here. As you can see, it's pretty worse for wear. Okay, so the first stage of the process is wire wheeling. Now yes, this is quite harsh on the metal, but I found it is the most effective way to remove any real pitting, any oxidization and staining on the fuel rail. Yes, it is very harsh, but don't panic because we will refine the metal each stage as we go along, and I will explain it as we go along as well. But it isn't too bad. As you can see, I'm getting it as smooth as I possibly can. Okay guys, swiftly on to stage 2, and right here I have 180 grit sanding discs, and these literally stick straight onto the end of this attachment on my rotary tool like so. These sanding discs with attachments, they are by Parkside, which you can find in your local little store or online. Just a couple of quid, very cheap, and also very effective for little pieces such as this. I'll try and post a link in the description for these ones, or if not, something equivalent. Now, as good as these sanding discs are, one thing you must not do is hold the sanding disc flat to your piece. Otherwise, this will put further marks and scratches in your piece. What you want to do is just hold it or tilt it on an angle and just use the edge of the sanding disc. Okay, now the rotary tool that I'm using here, guys, complete with the flexi attachment on the end. Again, it is a cheap one that I bought on eBay, around £35. I've had it around 4 years, and you know what? It's been absolutely faultless. I've used it to excess. Yeah, no complaints whatsoever. If I can, once again, I will post a link in the description for this. Step number 3, 320 grit, wet and dry. Now before we begin guys, this is where the real work begins. Now how good you want your piece to be heavily depends on how much time, effort and patience you put in. Now the longer you can spend doing each stage, the better your piece is going to be. Now there is no quick fix here guys, unfortunately you can't just spend a couple of minutes doing each stage. Personally I spent around half an hour between each step. So on to step number 4, which is 1200 grit, wet and dry. Now with regards to the grades of sandpaper guys, everybody has their own personal preference. Personally I'm just using what I've got in the garage. It doesn't really matter what grade sandpaper you use as long as each stage you're going finer and finer and finer. Now you could go from the 180 to a 320 to a 500 to a 1000 to a 1500 to a 2000. The higher the number, the finer the sandpaper. So yeah, as long as you just keep refining it, working up through the grades, you will get results. For grades of sandpaper, everybody has their own methods and ways of doing things. This is just what I chose to use. Swiftly onto step 5, and here in my hand I have 1000, 2000 and 3000 grit. I'm doing away with the 1000 because I've already done the 1200. So here we go. I'm cutting the disc in half because what I'm going to do is use half a disc for each fuel rail. These sanding discs are by Mirka Abrilon. You don't have to use them, but once again I'm just using what I've got in my garage. But it has to be said, being foam backed, it means I can get in all the little tight spots, nooks and crannies. Now these discs are generally used in body shops on buffers. They are velcro or hook and loop designed for wet sanding your bodywork. But yeah, for this they turned out to be very useful. Now personally guys, I spent more time on this stage than any other stage. It's quite a clean process because now you're more polishing it than sanding it. Speaking of which, I took it into the living room, much to my wife's annoyance, and I spent a couple of hours in front of the TV just rubbing it and rubbing it and rubbing it. Now excuse the pyjamas, but once again guys, the more time you spend doing these stages, the better your results are going to be. It heavily depends on you. This is just 2000 grit guys. Believe it or not, we've got another 2 stages to go. So next we've got 3000 grit, once again cutting it in half. Now here is where you see the shine really begin to come through. The 3000 grit, again, it's not really much of a sandpaper, it's more like a polishing pad, and look at that, wow. So yeah, once we get past this stage, the last final stage is going to be the metal polish. Now just for your information, I spent roughly around half an hour with the 3000 grit, but the results, as you can see, are pretty impressive. But as I say, we've got one more step to go. So here we are guys on the very last stage. Once again I'm just using what I've got available in my garage. In this case it is some standard Autosol metal polish. I'm using it on the end of these little buffing wheels on my Rotary tool. Now these little buffing wheels are great, you can buy them very cheaply online. These ones in particular that I'm using again are from my local little store, just a couple of quid. Now when it comes to your metal polishing, you don't want to absolutely lavish the metal polish on there. Less is way more effective. You need to generate a little bit of heat in order to get a really good buff. Now needless to say, during this whole process the most awkward, tedious, time consuming parts naturally are the brackets, the hard to reach areas, but you've just got to give it some time and some patience. You don't want to cut corners. Personally, I want to be able to stand back and really admire what I've done and just know that I've done a good job. So the very last, most rewarding stage, get a nice clean microfiber and buff off the excess residue, and there you go. Personally, I don't think it's absolute perfection, but I'm very, very pleased with the outcome. Now, I'm sure there is one big burning question that many people are probably wondering: am I going to lacquer these? Well, I suppose you could do, but for me personally, no. I think I'm going to leave them exactly as they are for a car that is only a summer driver. Personally, I'm going to take pride in just keep polishing them because, yeah, I'm a little bit weird like that. Now, are these finished? Well, maybe they're finished for the video, but there are still quite a few marks and little scratches to remove on the bracket parts. But yeah, overall, I'm quite pleased how they turned out. The original plan was to get these fuel rails zinc plated back to factory finish, but now, seeing them polished, I'm confident I've made the right decision. I think they're going to look great when they're back on the car. So there you go, guys and girls, that concludes this episode of the engine bay restoration project. So next time what we're going to be doing is completely repainting the slant panel. I've got some nice new decals to go on there as well. I'm also going to be repainting and rubbing down the relay holder on the UK driver's side. So yeah, that's what we're going to be doing next week. It's all in preparation for when, you know, the engine or everything inside the engine bay goes back together. These are all the little bits that I've got to do. So yeah, there you go. Thanks for watching as always, guys, and I shall see you next time. Bye bye.